Welcome to today's webinar, Tools for Calming an Anxious Mind from Survival to Stillness. My name is Lindsay. I'll be your moderator for this webinar. And by the end of this session, we're going to cover a clinical understanding of the anxiety loop and how to break it, actionable grounding techniques to use during moments of high stress, strategies to separate your identity from your anxious thoughts, building sustainable calm that lasts beyond the moment, and how to support others while they're experiencing anxiety. We're very lucky and excited to have Natalia Andreev, clinical manager at Tava Health and licensed professional counselor, here with us. It's a mouthful. Um, Natalia, MS LPC NCC, is a senior clinical operations manager and a licensed professional counselor with a strong background in both direct clinical care and behavioral health operations. She's passionate about helping individuals navigate life's challenges and incorporate sustainable mental health practices into their daily lives. She holds a master's of science in counseling from Rutgers University and utilizes evidence-based approaches, including cognitive behavioral therapy, solution-focused therapy, motivational interviewing, and mindfulness techniques. In her current role, Natalia collaborates cross-functionally with teams to advance clinical quality, support therapist development, and improve access to mental health services at scale. She's committed to creating environments that promote growth, resilience, and meaningful change, both for the individuals she supports and within the broader mental health system she helps lead. So, welcome, Natalia. I think that's all for me right now. Get those questions in as they come to you. And with that, I'm going to hand it off. Take it away, Natalia.
Thank you, Lindsay, and welcome everybody. I'm so glad that you made the time to be here with us today and learn all about how to build a toolkit to help with your anxiety. And I just want to maybe start by naming something that many people experience but do not always say out loud. So again, sometimes our mind can feel so busy, even nothing urgent is happening. And it can always feel like there is always something to review, something to anticipate, something to prepare, something to fix, something to prevent. And a lot of people, when they are in this state, they come to the topics, to the trainings on the topic of anxiety, hoping that they can find a way to turn it off completely. And I totally understand that because anxiety can be really scary, exhausting, draining, but today is actually going to be not about forcing the mind into silence or trying to become a person who never experiences anxiety or worry. So again, that's just going to be plain unrealistic. And honestly, it probably going to create even more pressure if that's the goal. But instead, we're just going to focus on understanding what is that anxiety is trying to do for us and how it gets stuck in certain loops and how to get unstuck and how we can respond to our anxiety with a little bit more intention. So the goal here today is going to be just to create a little bit more space between the anxious thought that you're having and the next action that you're going to take. Maybe the goal today is going to be to learn how to have a little more choice in how to manage your anxiety, maybe a little bit more trust that you can manage your anxiety, even when it shows up, and you can find the way back to yourself. And I do in my clinical work, and I do a lot of trainings on mental health topics. And I often have, people ask me a question about anxiety and being able to still function. And yes, a lot of people are functioning really well on the outside. They're showing up for work, they're taking care of their families, their responsibilities, they're answering messages, they're making decisions, and they're really getting through the day. However, internally, they can feel like their nervous system is constantly on high alert and just bracing for the next thing to happen. So, and this is one of the reasons this topic really is meaningful because anxiety doesn't have to look dramatic. It doesn't have to be really loud. Sometimes it looks different. It looks quiet. It looks like over preparing for something. Sometimes it looks like being overly responsible. Sometimes it looks like always being a person that somebody depends on. And today we're going to talk about anxiety in a way that is actually grounded, really compassionate, really practical. And I really hope that each and every one of you will leave today with, having gained at least one useful tool that can make, managing your anxiety just a little bit easier. And as Lindsay already sort of went through the agenda for today, but this is where we headed. We're going to talk about anxiety as our nervous system response. We're going to talk about the tools that help us deal with our anxiety in a moment. And then we're going to talk about the getting stuck in an anxiety loop and how to deal with overthinking, the rumination, and the safety behaviors. And then we're also going to talk about the tools that are really important to create that sustainable calm and not just in a moment support for anxiety. And also definitely talk about how to support a loved one or somebody that you deeply care for when they experience anxiety. And hopefully at the end, we can bring it all together and help you build your personal calm toolkit where you can have your own set of tools that could be just tailored to you and you can use when the anxiety shows up. We also always use this polling tool that makes our interaction just a little bit more engaging. So I invite everybody to join the poll and participate. All of the answers are anonymous. There's no right or wrong answers. The easiest way to join would be to text my name, which is Natalia Andreev, to the number 22333. Or you can go online, you can go to Poll EV, you can enter my name right here, and then and respond to the activity this way. Okay. Just gonna give folks just a few minutes. Okay. Maybe a few seconds. Well, I hope everybody was able to join, but we will post the instructions in the chat when needed. All right, so let's start with understanding anxiety, but through a very compassionate lens. So when people are anxious, they often become frustrated with themselves. At least this is the experience that I had observed when working with my clients or talking to people about anxiety. So they might think, why can't I just calm down? Why am I just making such a big deal out of this? But that kind of self-criticism, when you think about anxiety, it's just the only thing that it does, it just adds another layer of stress on the top of the anxiety that you're already experiencing. So before we talk about strategies, I just really want everybody to try to shift the frame here. Because again, anxiety is not something random. It's not usually the goal of anxiety is never to make your life harder. It's just the protective system that your body has, that your mind has, that is trying to alert you to something that your brain has perceived as either very important and needs your attention, something very uncertain, and we don't like uncertainty as humans, or maybe potentially threatening. So, and it's a very useful system to have because, again, it can actually be quite accurate and alert you to a real danger, but sometimes it can be too sensitive. Sometimes maybe it's responding to stress. In the real stress in the real moment, and sometimes it might be responding to something that is never going to happen, or something that had happened so long ago, and it's no longer dangerous in a moment. But once we shift our frame and see anxiety more as a signal, we can actually learn how to become more curious rather than purely reactive. And I think if you learn how to approach your anxiety from the lens of compassion and curiosity, that is going to be a really good starting point for you to change your approach. So, can you picture your mind as an open tab, like a computer tab? And I love this image of a mind as a computer tab that won't close because so many people can actually relate to it immediately. Again, anxiety does not always look like a panic attack. Sometimes anxiety is way more subtle. It could be that open tab that just runs on the background. So you have this background noise all day. Again, you may be making dinner for your family, but a part of your brain is already thinking about tomorrow's meeting and preparing. Maybe you're trying to fall asleep and suddenly your brain, maybe at 11:47 p.m., decides that now it's going to be the perfect time to start thinking about the conversation that you had 3 weeks ago with somebody. Or maybe you're watching your favorite Netflix show and you're just not really watching. You're there, but the part of your brain is constantly scanning the environment, trying to see if there is any danger, if there's anything that you'd forgotten, instead of really being present and enjoying the show. So, and when you think about this kind of mental activity, it's really draining. It tells your body that it can never get a break. It can never fully stand down and relax. So, as we begin this conversation about the tools for anxiety, I want you to think about your own version of that open tab. What keeps the tab open? Is it work? Is it relationship trouble? Is it family responsibilities? Is this health concerns? Maybe a lot of uncertainty in life. Maybe you constantly have this feeling that you always need to be doing something or to be ready for something or to be prepared for something. So, and we're going to keep coming back to that idea of a mind as an open tab. And again, it's really hard to just go and close the tab, right? If we can do on a computer with the click of the mouse. But I think here the goal is more to learn how to either close it gently over time or how to lower the volume if it's too loud and just allow yourself to become yourself in the present moment. And now we're going to take our poll for a spin. So when your mind does feel like an open tab and that will not close, what does it actually sound like? Does that tab sounds like, what if something goes wrong? Is that the common theme? Is should I be doing more? Or I can't relax until everything is done. Um, or maybe you don't really have a clear sentence that goes through your head. And if there's something else, you're welcome to share in the chat. Yeah, and as we see the responses coming in, and I'm glad to see that we had figured out the poll here, but you can see that anxiety take different forms for people and it could take different voices. So for some people it could be really catastrophic, right? Something bad is going to happen. For other people, anxiety can take that perfectionist voice. Everything has to be perfect in order for you to even think about relaxing. For others, it could be being hyper responsible, and that keeps you anxious and high alert. And again, for some people, anxiety is really loud, really urgent, really, really in your face. And for others, it could be just that low hum in the background that can just go away. So, and the reason I ask this question is because everything starts with awareness. Awareness matters. We can't respond to anxiety if we don't know our anxiety, if we don't recognize the patterns, if we don't know how anxiety sounds like. So, this is going to be the first step into gaining that self awareness. And I think if we look at the poll, the majority of people on this call are sharing that the anxiety sounds like I can't relax until it is handled. So again, that anxiety has that perfectionist voice that looks like we're kind of have people that experience all of these options here. And that would bring us to one of the central ideas for today's training, and that is anxiety as a survival signal and not your personality or your character flaw. So your nervous system, when it comes to anxiety, the nervous system is constantly scanning your environment for danger. And the reason it's doing it because it is trying to keep you safe. That system in our brain was designed many, 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 many moons ago, and it was designed to take quick action. But also, if you think about hundreds and thousands of years ago, there was a lot of immediate threats. Humans needed to survive. So they needed the mechanism in their brain that would alert them to all of those threats, though they can act immediately and actually live to see another day. And, that's how that anxiety mechanism in our brain developed. But modern life is actually different, right? So we're not being chased by lions anymore, but that alarm system, the nervous system, is still using the same alarm system it was, using thousands of years ago. But the threats are different now in modern life, and you can probably all agree. So the threats these days are the deadlines that we're facing at work, the difficult conversations that we need to have, the unread messages that keep piling up. Sometimes it's financial pressure, sometimes it's health concerns, sometimes it's the expectations around our performance, or maybe it's just even the possibility of disappointing another person, or people in your life can actually again elicit the same anxiety response as if you were in front of the real danger. So, and again, the body cannot differentiate sometimes between being chased by a lion and I am about to have a difficult conversation with somebody in my life. It responds with the same physical intensity. Your heart starts to race, your chest tightens, your muscle tighten up, your stomach drops, you have your breathing patterns changes. So when we talk about calming the anxiety, we're not trying to turn off or shame that system that we have because it's quite useful for the situations that actually warrant it. But we're just trying to help it become a little bit more accurate. We're trying to make it a little bit more, I would say, calibrated, because again, our goal is to teach our nervous system that This is uncomfortable, but I'm not in any immediate danger and I can respond without going into the full survival mode or the full spiral. So that's the goal here. All right, well, let's bring this into the body for a moment. And if you think about your own anxiety and you think about your own body response, what would be the association that you have? What would be the reaction, the physical reaction that you observe? It could be anything from tightness in your chest to pressure to nausea to shaking hands to heaviness, racing hearts, frozen, overwhelmed, shaking. Absolutely. Yeah, because if you think about this, anxiety is not only the thought process. Thought process and anxiety is definitely a part of it, but it's also a very physical state. And that is why sometimes just talking ourselves out of anxiety, not always helpful. If your body is really activated, if you have tight shoulders, if you're having a headache, if your chest is tight, if you're feeling nervous, if you have this buzzing sound in your ears, um, again, logic alone, thoughts alone are not going to be very helpful here. Again, the heart rate increases, there's many physical changes that happen when we are in a heightened state of anxiety. So when we throughout this webinar, we are going to talk about both types of tools. We're going to talk about the mind-based tools that are going to help you with the thinking part of the anxiety, and then we're also going to talk a lot about the body-based tools, because sometimes, again, you'll see that sometimes you do need to challenge a thought that is occurring and causing the anxiety, or sometimes you need to breathe. Sometimes you need to move. Sometimes you need to reduce the sensory input that is making you more anxious. And sometimes you're probably going to need a combination of all of those tools to actually bring your anxiety down and allow yourself to, again, step into your rational brain and choose maybe a tool that is going to allow you to sustain that calmness for longer. Yes, absolutely. I have heard clients over years share all of the symptoms when they're anxious. I definitely observe a lot of those symptoms in sessions with clients, especially the muscle tightness, the very shallow breathing. And a lot of times people are not even aware that they're doing that until somebody points it out, and you would encourage somebody to take a full breath, and all of a sudden they just feel just a little bit lighter, yeah, racing heart and feeling sick, and fear and anger and overwhelmness, tenseness. Again, anxiety can be very physical. Yes, difficulty breathing because our breathing pattern changes. Thoughts are frozen. So again, thank you so much. I love seeing such a great participation here. So you see the themes here, and I want you to keep that in mind because, again, we're going to talk a lot about the body-based tools. And one thing that can make anxiety even more difficult to manage would be that sometimes people think that everybody else is handling life easier than they are when they're in the middle of anxiety. And many people actually carry it quite quietly. So again, they do show up for work, they respond to the emails, they attend to all of their responsibilities, they and again, from outside, they may look just fine, but internally, though, again, they feel all of those physical symptoms that we've identified. Mentally, they might always feel like they need to brace themselves for the next thing that might happen. They might feel overstimulated, or they just might feel so overwhelmed and constantly behind because of that anxiety. And again, we also live in an environment that makes that more likely, right? If you think about people being able to reach us, right? With the phones and the internet, like we're reachable all the time. We receive information in the amounts that is really hard to process for a human brain. So we can get overwhelmed with all of that sensory input. Again, for people who might work remotely, your work and home life can blur together and create its own source of anxiety. Again, there is a lot of uncertainty in people's lives and the workplaces, just in the world in general. So, but if you look at the numbers, anxiety is one of the most commonly diagnosed mental health challenges, and not only in the US, but also in the world with millions and millions of people. And this number is including only the people that were diagnosed that came forward and shared that they have they experiencing challenges with anxiety. So I'm pretty sure that this number is higher if we account for people who have never been diagnosed formally. So again, a part of our work today is not about minimizing the anxiety, but rather normalizing it, that anxiety is pretty common. It is unique to you, but it's also a very common mental health challenge. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to live tolerating anxiety alone without the support of the tools that can actually help. And again, we're going to talk about those tools because they can definitely make the difference. All right. Again, our goal when it comes to anxiety is not and never to just quiet the mind. And this is an important reframe before we go into the anxiety loop theme. And if you are trying to make your mind quiet because you're feeling really anxious, it is going to probably create a lot of pressure on you. You can probably start thinking, well, why am I still worrying? I'm doing all of these things. I'm trying to clear my mind. I'm trying to quiet my mind. I just did this breathing exercise. Why didn't it fix my anxiety? Why can't I just relax? So again, the goal is not to quiet the mind today, but also, but rather change maybe your relationship with anxiety, maybe your, you know, attitude towards your anxiety. I know it could be really stressful and frustrating, but maybe you need to shift more towards asking yourself questions such as, can I actually notice my anxiety sooner and do something about it? Can I actually use my words and name what's happening? Can I find a way to take a quick pause before I react to something? Maybe can I choose one very small regulating action instead of just automatically throwing myself into the anxiety loop? So this is the work because anxiety is probably still going to show up. It's a human experience. But over time, if you're consistent with the tools, it just doesn't have to be something that makes every decision for you. You can take that control back. So that's the goal. Now we're going to talk about how our mind gets stuck, right? So we have a little bit of a foundation as to what anxiety is trying to do, why we experience anxiety. But again, situational anxiety, temporary anxiety is fine. It's unpleasant, but we can typically all manage it. But anxiety becomes really hard to manage when it gets stuck in that loop. And we're going to talk about that loop in the next slide. So again, something triggers uncertainty. For example, your mind starts interpreting things. The body responds, right? So your shoulders tighten, your breathing changes, and then we're going to try to do something to make ourselves feel safe in that moment. And again, this response could be helpful in a moment, but that's often what, with that short term relief is what's going to reinforce the loop and keep that anxiety system on a high alert. So the next section is going to be about recognizing that loop. And once you know what your loop looks like and what activates it, you can actually learn how to interrupt that loop and get out of that cycle. And we call it the what if cycle. Again, if you think, just step back and you think about your anxious mind when you are in that state of anxiety, your anxious mind is working really hard at problem solve. It's constantly trying to anticipate something, prepare you for something, prevent something, protect you from something. And again, oftentimes that same mind that is trying to do you a favor and keep you safe, it is trying to solve a thing that is actually maybe not even solvable in that particular moment. And this is where the loop happens, right? So something creates a trigger happens, something creates the uncertainty, and then your mind is trying to reduce that uncertainty by thinking through every possible outcome, every possible scenario. This is where the rumination happens. And then we try to bring about that temporary relief because it feels like if we're doing something, we're helping ourselves. And we can probably maybe use an example here. For example, and this is a common workplace example, you send an email to somebody and they don't respond right away or within a couple of minutes. So a grounded thought of a person who doesn't have anxiety would be, well, that person's probably busy. I will follow up with them tomorrow if I don't hear back. But if you have a tendency or you have very anxious mind, your thought process is probably going to get stuck in that loop. Did I say something wrong in that email? Are they upset with me? What if they're upset with me? What if it affects my job? What if I should send another message? Should I send them another message? What if I send a message and it makes it all worse? So at this point, the mind is no longer responding to the email. It is just responding to all of that chain of imagined consequences or scenarios that you just imagined. Also, I think another helpful example could be maybe the health related anxiety. Again, maybe you wake up or in the middle of the day, you notice that you're developing a headache, maybe your heart is racing, or maybe you just have a strange sensation in your body. And again, when we talk about the health related anxiety, just want to be clear that if you're experiencing the symptoms that are new, that they're severe, persistent, concerning, of course you should seek medical guidance. So the point here is not to, when it comes to health anxiety, not to ignore your body and dismiss real concerns, but again, anxiety shows up when you allow yourself to get out of that reasonable awareness. Yes, my heart rate is elevated, and you turning that into the repeated temporary relief and check-in behaviors. You go and you start researching, you start checking, you start Googling, you are seeking reassurance from somebody that you're okay, which brings maybe a momentarily relief but never lasts. So again, if you're experiencing an elevated heart rate, for example, a grounded response of a person who doesn't have anxiety, or maybe that's somebody that is trying to work towards managing the anxiety better, a grounded response would be, I'm noticing this symptom that is happening. I know I can take care of my body. I can monitor it over a period of time and see if it changes. And if needed, I can always seek some medical guidance, right? If it doesn't improve. But again, the anxious mind will probably jump to the conclusion. What if this is something super serious? What if I miss the warning sign? What if I need, you know, something bad is going to happen to me? Do I need to Google it right now? Or if I just leave it alone for a little bit, what if it's going to get really, really bad and then something bad is going to happen? And again, this is the difference, again, for an anxious mind to be able to either respond to the information that it's receiving or getting stuck in the loop. So, again, I think a very useful question to ask yourself when you are circling through this loop is, am I solving or am I circling, right? So if you're observing the chain of events happening, the trigger, the rumination, and then you're trying to find the way to reduce that anxiety, if you're solving the problem, it is taking you towards the next step. If the answer is, I'm just circling, right? So nothing is helping and I'm back at square one. So then you definitely need to expand your toolkit and actually learn maybe another set of tools that's going to help you to interrupt that loop. And again, the first step to being able to interrupt the loop is to be aware of the loop, right? So can you share which part of the anxiety loop do you notice most often? So when it comes to anxiety, is this about the trigger? Is this the what if thoughts that follow that you're most aware of? Maybe it's the overthinking part. I see that a lot of people already checking in this overthinking every possible outcome. Uh, so this could be maybe your doorway into noticing what is most prominent for you when it comes to anxiety loop, and saying, okay, what can I do here to interrupt this loop, maybe in like half of the time. Maybe I won't be successful every time, but half of the time I'll be able to do something about it. Again, if you are somebody who is getting temporary relief because they're checking and avoiding, maybe your strategy would be, can I delay this for just 10 minutes? I can still check it, but I'm going to give myself 10 minutes and do maybe a breathing exercise. And then I'm allowing myself to check. If you are catching yourself at that what if thinking stage, maybe this is something that you can say, okay, I know I'm now going into this catastrophizing scenario. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do a thought processing exercise or reframing. We're going to talk about cognitive behavioral therapy as well. And the interruptions of the loop matter because they actually teach in our nervous system that there is another way of dealing it instead of just circling in a loop. All right, so I guess we have a lot of overthinkers on this call. Oh, again, one of the reasons that anxiety can be so convincing that it doesn't just show up as a thought on your head, right? It shows up in your body, right? So you actually not only think it, you can feel it. It's really real. Your heart rate is racing. Your stomach can feel like it's in a knot. Your chest can tighten. And, again, when your body is in that activated state, when your nervous system is in overdrive, the mind is going to start to look for a reason because it's going to say, well, the body feels alarmed. Now I feel alarmed, so something must be wrong. And this is where people need to make that important distinction between the feeling that is very real. We're not trying to dismiss the feeling. Yes, you feel concerned, you feel scared, you feel fearful. The feeling is really real, but the conclusion that your mind is making is probably not accurate. Again, if you feel like you're in danger of something bad is happening, the feeling of danger is really, it's real, it's there, but the danger itself, probably not. So instead of, a lot of people find themselves really arguing with the anxiety or trying to just shut it down, force it away. Um, I instead invite you to just slow it down and try to separate three things for yourself: the fact, what is actually happening, the feeling that is accompanying that anxiety, that again, whatever bodily sensation that you're experiencing. So, what is the fact? What is the bodily response? What is the feeling? And what is the story that your mind is adding? For example, if your manager says, "Can we talk later?" All right. So your thought is, my manager asked me to talk later. Well, that's actually the fact, right? So we're separating now. If the next thought that occurs to you is, something must be wrong. So, well, that would be your interpretation, right? So your mind is starting to interpreting the request for a meeting. If the next thought is, I'm probably going to be in trouble, and that's definitely going to be your anxiety trying to fill in the blanks, because humans don't like not having complete picture, or they don't like uncertainty. And if the next thought is, I'm probably going to lose my job, this is definitely your mind just jumping to conclusions and catastrophizing. Again, that would be an anxious mind's progression of thoughts, where if you don't have anxiety, or you're able to get yourself to a place where you can respond differently, a grounded response to, can we have a meeting or conversation later from your manager? You might say, well, I'm feeling anxious, but I don't have enough information. I can prepare for this meeting if I need to prepare, but I don't need to treat this as a crisis because I don't even know what this conversation is about. Again, the same goes for your health related anxiety. Again, the thought is, I just observed my heart rate is higher than usual. My heart is beating faster. Again, the feeling that's going to accompany it is going to be that fear or alarm. And your brain might start developing that story. Something is seriously wrong. You need to go in and you need to start checking your pulse. You need to go online and start searching the symptoms until you feel certain that you're okay. So, again, the anxiety pattern we're talking about here is that the mind always, when people are anxious, the mind moves from the reasonable brain, the reasonable awareness of the situation, into that repeated loop of, we're going to check, we're going to Google, we're going to scan, we're going to find reassurance from somebody or something, just so I can get a little bit of relief. So the question is not, how do I make all of this disappear? The question to yourself when you are, again, finding yourself stuck in that loop is this the fact? Is this a feeling? Or is this the story that my mind is creating? And once you kind of place your thoughts into these little categories, this is the fact, this is the feeling that I'm experiencing, and this is the story that my mind just made up just to fill in the gaps. The next question is going to be, what would be the reasonable next step? And again, the that question of what is the next reasonable step is about grounding ourselves, not dismissing the feeling. Again, you might still feel scared, you might still feel super anxious, but it's just you are trying to refuse to believe the notion that your brain is just telling you the plain truth about what's happening, right? So there is some inconsistencies. And that brings us to that safety behaviors that follow. And it's a really one of the central and important topics when you think about cognitive behavioral therapy. And safety behaviors are things that we do to reduce anxiety, and they're very helpful in a very short term. So, because they make complete sense. If something makes you anxious, of course, you would want to relieve that anxiety. So you're going to engage in whatever helps. But again, if you are constantly defaulting to those safety check-in behaviors, it's just going to teach your nervous system the wrong lesson, because you can, again, avoiding something that feels anxiety provoking. For example, you are not a big fan of public speaking and you avoid any type of public speaking opportunity or presentation at all costs. Does it give you the relief in a moment? Absolutely. but it is going to teach your nervous system to say, all right, it looks like I can never do public speaking again, instead of saying, well, I can actually do a presentation. I might still feel anxious about it, but I can tolerate that anxiety because I've done that before. So I always say that sometimes there's this phrase that says sometimes the short term reliefs is going to buy you the long term anxiety. Because again, the behavior is going to help you in the short term, but in the long term, it's probably going to do the opposite and just, again, teach your nervous system how to stay in that loop. Again, when you are engaging in safety behaviors, if you know that you are, whether it's avoidance, whether it's overchecking, where it's seeking for that constant reassurance, just I invite you to just notice in them, be compassionate towards yourself. Again, they're probably working for you. Maybe they worked in the past. That's why you're going back to them. Maybe they do make sense now. Maybe they made sense at some point. But again, we're not asking whether they're helping because we know that they are. We're asking where they just again keeping your nervous system on this active state and not helping you in the long term. So now we're going to talk about the tools actually that are going to be helpful. And we're going to start with the tools that it can help us in a moment when anxiety is high. And again, we don't need a super complicated regimen or the self improvement plan. We just need something super simple that we can just go to when our brain is not at its best and it's really operating in that anxiety mode. And again, these tools are about interrupting the cycle in a moment. And then once we cover those tools, we're going to talk about the tools that can actually help you maintain the calm more sustainably. And again, they may not eliminate anxiety completely, but they might help you just to dial it down a notch, just enough to, again, that you can regain, you can go back into your rational brain and maybe engage in other coping skills. So, but before we get into the tools, let's see how people usually deal with anxiety. I know you guys are ahead of the game. You already started the next fall, but when anxiety spikes, do you breathe? Do you use distraction? Do you check for reassurance? Do you try to avoid the very first thing that's causing you anxiety? Yeah. And I think it's really great, Paul, because we could see that most of us already have coping strategies. Again, the question here is whether this strategy is actually regulating or simply giving our anxiety a little bit more fuel. Again, distraction is not always bad. Check-in behaviors are not always bad. Avoidance is sometimes appropriate when there is actually something truly unsafe. But when these are the only tools that become a part of our toolkit, that's when we have maybe a little bit of a problem and we need to learn some other tools. But deep breathing, I'm glad to see that a lot of people actually do deep breathing. And I really hope that it's helpful. So we're going to start with the grounding. And I think it's one of my most favorite points because it's just so simple. It's so portable. It's available almost everywhere. Because if you know, our anxious mind, it's like a little bit of I call it a time traveler. Very rarely our anxiety lives in the present. A lot of times it goes into the future. What if something happens? It goes into the past. Oh my God, I can't believe I just said that in a meeting 3 days ago. But when you are able to ground yourself in the present, in the here and now, that's what actually going to give you again that little pause that you can come back to your rational brain and engage another coping skill. And this is a very useful and easy technique to remember. It's 5 things that you can see, four things that you can touch, 3 things that you hear, 2 things that you smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And what you're really doing is just giving your nervous system the present moment information. Again, if your anxiety always goes into the future about the things that might potentially never even happen, again, bringing the body and the mind into here and now. Again, you giving your body and your mind the signal. I'm not in any imagined disaster zone right now. I am in this room. There's the chair that I'm sitting on. There's the light coming through the window. I can feel the breeze. There's all of the sounds around me. I am here and I am safe. And I know this might sound simple, but again, the present moment information could be really, really powerful for an anxious brain. Again, to the mind that is already running ahead of time. I also want to maybe preface all of these tools by saying that I invite you to actually practice them when you're not in a heightened anxiety state, because it is really hard to practice a new skill when you're already anxious. So I always say practice the tools in between those episodes of anxiety. Practice them when you have a minute, because again, they're just so discreet. You can practice it when you're in a meeting, when you're surrounded by other people. And again, you don't need any specific preparation or, again, it's just you and I think, your intention, the intention that you set. So the next one is about breathing techniques. And it's just another way for your body to communicate safety, for your brain to communicate safety to your body. And I also want to mention something important here, because not everybody loves breathing exercises, especially at first. I have had many of clients and people that I've talked to over the years who'd say, Natalia, don't tell me about another breathing exercise. They just don't work. And again, it's a fair statement. I'm always open-minded and we always talk about why they believe they don't work. But a lot of times, again, people are trying to teach themselves this breathing exercises and breathing techniques when they're already in the throes of anxiety, and it just diminishes the effectiveness. So I always say you should practice them outside of those anxiety episodes, and then they come easier and more naturally, and then you tend to notice the effectiveness a little bit more. Again, I also have heard that people say, well, when I'm trying to focus on my breath, it actually makes me more aware of my body, right? And I'm already anxious. My body's already anxious. And now I'm focusing on my breathing, and it's just making me feel a little more uncomfortable, even more anxious. And again, if that's you, if you recognize yourself in this pattern, just again, I invite you to approach it gently. You don't have to do it perfectly. You don't have to force a deep breath if that's not something that you can do in a moment. Again, just try to do what you can to allow your body to slow down. Again, one of the very powerful exercises that a lot of people use, a lot of groups that work in pretty high stress situations, think about professional athletes, military personnel, first responders, they all are being taught and encouraged to use the box breathing. Again, and it's a very simple exercise, very simple to remember. And you will inhale on a count of 4. You will hold your breath on an inhale for the count of 4. You will exhale on a count of 4, and then you will hold your breath on an exhale for the count of 4. So you're kind of drawing a square. Sometimes it's also called a square breathing. Okay. Um, our anxious mind is running wild, and it needs structure to calm down. So anything that can give it structure for a little bit would be helpful, because it's going to take the mind out of that chaotic state. Again, box breathing is important and really effective. The belly breathing is also very effective, because it does signal your nervous system that you're safe, you're here, because you're breathing deeply, right? So again, when you're in a state of anxiety, even if it's like an imaginary trigger, your body activates the sympathetic nervous system and starts treating the situation as though, again, you are in the midst of something very dangerous. So your heart rate goes up, your breathing becomes shallow, you experience all of this clammy hands or muscle tenderness. But if you are able to force or gently invite a deeper breath that goes into your belly, it allows you to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which actually does the opposite, right? That's what calms down your nervous system, slows down your breathing, lowers your pulse, your heart rate. Again, as the only thing that you need to remember when you feel anxious is that I need to make my exhales longer than my inhales. Again, you're anxious and you can't remember any of the exercises, the breathing techniques that we talk about. Just try to take a breath normally, like you normally would, but when you exhale, just try to make the exhale just slightly longer. If you can count and make, for example, your inhale on the count of 5 and then exhale on the count of 7, that's fantastic. Again, that long, slow exhale is going to signal to your body, I can slow down by 1 degree if if anything. And again, it's just going to provide that signal is I'm not being chased by any dangerous animal, for example, or I'm not facing any life-threatening situation. Maybe I can just reevaluate. So that would be 2 techniques that are really helpful in a moment. And now we're also going to talk about sensory and body-based regulation tools. Again, a lot of times you would say, well, I'm trying to reframe my thinking. It just didn't work. And sometimes it's because, again, our body just needs attention first because it's pumping adrenaline, and maybe the worksheet on cognitive reframing is not going to be the most helpful tool for you right now. So you may just need a quick movement. Maybe you just need, if your body is so anxious, maybe you need to take a walk, maybe you need to stretch, maybe you need to shake out your hands, maybe go up and down the stairs, maybe, again, do any quick burst of movement just to allow your body to metabolize that nervous, anxious energy. If you are somebody who is feeling emotionally flooded, again, just so much sensory input and your emotions are running wild. So, one of the ways that you can also help your body regulate would be exposure to some cold temperature. It's going to, again, allow you to create that physiological shift. So, you can do maybe splash some cold water in your face. Maybe you can hold something cold like an ice cube for a little bit. Maybe you can run cold water over your wrists. Again, it's all going to help just bring the intensity of your anxiety down. And then another thing about overstimulation is sometimes the loud environment is going to feed your anxiety. So finding quite a space, again, listening to maybe slow music, um, anything that can reduce the sensory input could be helpful. And tactile things, they really work for me, whether you have a blanket, a sweater, maybe a stress ball, maybe you pet your dog, maybe you hold a warm coffee or tea mug. Again, I know it sounds simple, but they're not silly. It's just, again, anything that could signal to our body that you're safe, you're taken care of. Again, it is going to override that nervous impulse to stay in that anxiety loop. So just finding your own combination of body-based tools that can interrupt that anxiety would be really helpful. And then we have the cognitive and behavioral tools. Again, when you are feeling a little bit more regulated, so you're not at 100 on your anxiety scale, then those tools can be really effective. One of them could be to start with, just taking a pause. And the pause is a mental pause that creates that gap between whatever triggered your anxiety and the response that you are about to have. Again, email comes in and you feel anxious, just pause. 3 breaths, pause. The anxious thought appears and you know you're already spiraling, just pause. Do a couple breaths, do the grounding exercise. If you're having that urge to engage in a safety behavior, such as checking or avoiding or over explaining or seeking reassurance from somebody, again, take a pause, take a breath, because if you're able to take that pause and create that gap, that's where you can make a choice. If you don't create that gap, you don't really have much choice. Anxiety is just probably going to take over. And then you can go into more thought-based exercises. Again, am I dealing with a fact or am I dealing with a feeling? Do I have any evidence for it? What evidence might be ignoring? Maybe I have the evidence for feeling anxious, but maybe there's evidence that I am just choosing to ignore. What would I say to a friend if the friend shared that they being in the same situation? Again, a lot of times I encourage people to do some value-based responding instead of asking, how can I make anxiety how can I make my anxiety go away right now? You can ask, what would the version of me that I actually respect and I would love to be would do right now? Again, you tie it back to your values. And again, if you ask yourself those questions, is this the fact or the feeling? How would I advise a friend in this situation? What would another version of me do? What would non-anxious version of me do in this situation? It's just, again, it's not going to bring you the immediate relief, but more allow you to get in a place where you can choose a little bit more intentionally and, again, help yourself a little bit more sustainably rather than just interrupting the loop. Again, we do know anxiety loves comfort, and comfort and some of the safety behaviors are still going to be used, and that's fine. It just makes us human. So those are the tools that I invite you to try for immediate relief. But and they're helpful. They can really work. But we definitely need to learn the tools that are going to allow us to create more of a sustainable way of managing our anxiety. And again, if you think about maybe like a smoke alarm, if smoke alarm goes off, and of course you want to make it quiet. They're quite loud, they're quite annoying, but if it continues to, and you do something to maybe stop it in the moment and it helps, but if it continues to go off, right? So we need some other strategies. You need to see what's happening. Why is something actually on fire? Is the battery getting low? Is my alarm too sensitive? Do I need to replace it? So this is the same with the sustainable calm techniques. They're the ones that are going to be used to allow you to create the life that is a little bit easier, a little bit less anxiety driven, and a little bit more enjoyable. So some of the foundations here are the boundaries. And I know boundaries a lot of times are discussed as the relationship skill, but they also a nervous system regulation skill. So again, if you think about boundaries, when you say yes, when you mean to say no, what are you doing is you're feeding your anxiety and you're teaching your body that your needs are always negotiable to other people. When you respond to every email or text message immediately, again, you are teaching your mind and your body that everything is urgent. Again, when you're always taking responsibility for other people's comfort and trying to keep peace and trying to keep everybody happy, you're teaching your mind and your body that we can only relax when everybody around us are happy. And it could get a really exhausting way to live this way. And again, that's why we need boundaries. It's not the wall, it needs a structure. And again, our anxiety can be pretty chaotic. Any structure that we can put around it would be really helpful. And I know when we're anxious and we're trying to create boundaries, that can actually create a lot of discomfort for people who are anxious because they create a lot of uncertainty, right? So you being able to say no is not going to feel comfortable for an anxious person. And you're going to have to accept that sometimes people will be disappointed. Sometimes people will misunderstand. Sometimes they might not get the reaction that they want, but that's what you need to help your nervous system regulate. And this is very quickly on the boundary styles. Again, some people have boundaries that are very porous, meaning your front door is open. Every request, every emotion, every crisis, every expectation just comes in. And, these people look kind, they look very flexible, they always agreeable, they can't say no, but internally they experience a lot of resentment and a lot of anxiety. And then we have the other side of the spectrum where people have the door shut, it never opens. And again, very, very difficult to manage anxiety. So our goal is to always build up towards the healthy boundaries that is firm, but also warm, where you can say, I really care about this. I really care about you, but I just cannot take it on right now, or I'm not available tonight because, again, you had planned maybe a self-care activity. So when it comes to boundaries, just remember that you can still be kind, you can still be clear, and you can still be firm. So another quick check-in about boundaries. Which one is the hardest for you to preserve when you're really anxious? Is it saying no? Is it not over-explaining or not checking messages consistently? Asking for what you need? Taking a real break? Okay. So I guess we also kind of spread out across all of these options. Yeah. So boundaries are important. So I definitely, and I know you might not have thought about it in the context of anxiety, but it's definitely a powerful tool to build that sustainable practice. And again, moving from judgment to curiosity. So again, sometimes we might really judge ourselves. Why am I like this? Why am I so anxious again? I should be able to handle this right now. But again, the problem with judgment is that it usually does not calm our nervous system. It just adds a lot of pressure. And now we're anxious and now we're criticizing ourselves about being anxious. So it creates its own loop. And if you can learn how to operate from the place of curiosity and ask yourself curious questions to understand your anxiety better. And that's definitely going to make a lot of difference as well. So again, shifting your mind from judgment to curiosity. And then lifestyle foundations. I know people are going to say, well, this is pretty simple. I'm not sure if it works. But again, anxiety does require your body to be well. So you do need to take care of your body. It means regular movement, making sure that you get enough sleep, that your nutrition is, good, that you are minimizing or avoiding caffeine and alcohol, that you get enough sunlight. All of those little things actually matter. Again, you don't have to do the entire complicated wellness routine. You just need to be, what is the one small thing that would make my body feel slightly supported this week, right? So slightly more supported. Maybe it's, again, less caffeine, less alcohol. Maybe it's going for a walk. Maybe it's going to bed early. But all of this are going to build up to that sustainable practice of managing anxiety. And then engaging in CBT. We talked about CBT a little while ago in a few slides back, but it's definitely a very, very helpful strategy. And if you are in therapy and you're working with a therapist, that's probably something that has been introduced to you, right? Again, your relationship, you examine the relationships between your thoughts, between your feelings, and between your behaviors. And again, it is just allowing us to slow the anxious thoughts down enough before we truly believe it and take a good action that actually going to help you reduce the anxiety. All right, and just remember that calmness and living a calm life is not a destination. It's a practice. That's something that you do need to practice consistently. Again, small choices matter. The foundational things matter. Again, creating that small pause that you can actually engage in a good coping skills, that matters too. And now I just wanted to briefly talk about how to support others through anxiety, because again, people sometimes it's not just you who is feeling anxious. Maybe you're somebody who is supporting another person who is anxious, and that's where sometimes we feel trapped, because if somebody else is struggling, somebody that we love and deeply care about, we just want to remove that struggle. If your child is anxious, you're going to try everything in your power to remove that anxiety for them. Again, if your child is anxious to order something in the restaurant, really anxious, you will do it for them. If a person is having a hard time initiating a hard conversation, maybe you'll be somebody who will step in and help them. But again, when you talk about supporting another person, support is appropriate, but it's always it's not always about rescuing the person from discomfort. You can still support them and allow them to learn that, I can still do something, even though I'm it making me feel anxious, but I can still do it. So what are you allowing to do? What are you allowed to do instead when you're trying to support a person with anxiety is to help them build the confidence. Again, if you take away that discomfort all the time, the person will never learn. So they're just going to default to you for that assurance seeking, for that safety behaviors that we talked about earlier. So again, the question for you as somebody who supports them would be not how do I make the anxiety go away, but it's more like how do I support them while also help them build their confidence. And this is also comes with that constant reassurance. Again, sometimes it feels kind. A child or another person will seek for reassurance because that makes the anxiety feel better. And sometimes we give it to them. But again, over time, it just allows their brain to stay in that loop that, I can only feel okay if somebody tells me or confirms that I'm okay. So again, learning how to support and say, do you need me to just sit here with you? Do you need me to help you problem solve? Do you want me to go over options instead of just constantly reassuring? So again, redirecting people towards more confidence, towards engaging all of those strategies that we talked about would probably be the best way to support somebody. And I know we're time, so I just wanted to talk about this building your own calmness toolkit. We're going to drop the links in the chat, but we're also going to send an email to follow up that is going to contain all of these wonderful links. So when you are trying to build your own toolkit, you will need the combination of one of two things. Again, you will find something that works for you and practice it when you're not anxious. And if anxiety shows up, you're like, I am ready, I am prepared, I have it in my toolbox. And with that, I wanted to thank you for being here. I know we ran out of time a little bit, but we are going to send you this slide deck and the links to really great resources that we have. So thank you.